Good evening. My name is Evan Gregory, and this is Bible Answers. Tonight's topic is going to be on Israel and the law. So we're talking about Israel and the Old Law specifically. And as always, this is brought to you by the North Columbus Church of Christ, located in Columbus, Mississippi. And our website, scroll below me, is northcolumbuschristians.com. And you can find us on YouTube as well. And our page is North Columbus Church of Christ. And subscribe to our page, and you'll be notified when we upload new videos. And so, again, going right into the lesson, we're talking about Israel and the law, and coming at it in the context of much that is written in the New Testament seems to talk about the limitations of the old law, the basically how the Jews or the nation of Israel did not live up to the standard that God gave them, and definitely didn't live up to that in the New Testament. And so, and especially in today's climate with the politics surrounding Israel and all that, there's a lot of people that have some misconceptions about Israel and God's plan for Israel as a nation, either in the past and or in the future. And so I think it'd be useful for us to talk about this particular topic. And so going right into the lesson, we're going to look at four questions and try to answer those four questions tonight. And the first one is the law of Moses bad? So was there something bad about it, or was there some ulterior motive of God to, I guess, make the nation of Israel fail? Because what we see is in the New Testament, and of course I might be getting ahead of myself, is that there is much talk in the New Testament talking about that there was things that the law could not do, that it did not was not quite good enough to forgive sins. And so we're going to look at that and see if the law in and of itself is bad. We're also going to look at how did God bless Israel. So from the beginning of the nation, up until Christ, and then we're going to look at how did Israel pay back those blessings. So how did Israel react towards God in regards to those blessings? And also, if you're students of the Bible, you know that Israel just simply did not keep the law. They really failed miserably, and anybody would fail. Any person would fail miserably at keeping that old law. So why would God give that law in the first place? Why would He give something that people won't keep? So we're going to try to answer those four questions tonight. First of all, we're going to look at is the law of Moses bad? And simply put, the Bible clearly states, and the New Testament clearly states that there was nothing bad about the law in and of itself. We see in Acts chapter 9, verses 3 through 5, that the nation of Israel was blessed. It says in the middle of the thought, it says, "Who are Israelites, to whom pertain the adoption, the glory, the covenants, the giving of the law, the service of God, and the promises, of whom are the fathers, and from whom, according to the flesh, Christ came, who is over all the eternally blessed God." So they had many benefits. They had the adoption. They were God's chosen people. They had the covenants, giving of the law. They knew exactly what God expected of them. And also through them came Christ. And so we see that they were blessed because of this. In Acts 7, verse 53, Stephen says that they had received the law by the direction of angels. Okay, and so we see of the divine nature of this law, and how good it could be. Angels involved in the giving of it and directing that law towards Israel. We see in Galatians 3 and verse 21, it says, "Is the law then against the promises of God? Certainly not, for if there had been a law given which could have given life, truly righteousness would have been by the law." So Paul says that if law could give life, then it would have been that old law. So it was the best of the best. Romans 7 and verse 12 says, "Therefore the law is holy, and the commandment holy and just and good." So pretty clear there. The law is holy, just, and good. And so what we see is that throughout the script, in particular in the New Testament, is that it is clear that the there's not something bad about the old law, that it was not something that was given to force people to fail. That in and of itself, it is good, holy, and just. And this is that law that Israel had, and God blessed them by giving them that law. But there's just some things, there were just some problems with it, that the nature of law itself, that it caused problems for people, but it was not necessarily a fault in the law itself. And so, again, Israel received all those blessings. We're going to look at how did God bless Israel, and we kind of blow through a lot of these verses, but we see where God promised that ultimately the nation of Israel land. We see that it goes all the way back to Abram, that his descendants were going to receive a land, and that and he was going to have so many descendants that they could not even be numbered. We see that in Genesis 13, verses 14 through 16, and also in Exodus 12 and verse 25, reiterating that promise that the Lord's going to give them that land. He promised it to them, and so it's going to come to fruition, even if it takes some time, even hundreds of years, for that to come forward. We also see in Genesis 22 verses 15 through 18 again another time which Abraham is receiving this promise, or really this re-emphasizing of this promise, that he's going to have plenty of descendants, and that he's going to be blessed, and through his seed, all the nations of the earth are going to be blessed. Now recognize why Abraham received these blessings. It says at the very end here, verse 18, that it says, because you have obeyed my voice. It is blessed because of the obedience and ultimately the faith that he shows towards God. And in Psalms 105, verse 37 through 45, this passage here is kind of talking about Israel's history from the Exodus into the land of Canaan, and talking about some of the things and how God helped them. He says he brought them out with silver and gold, and there was none feeble among his tribes. Egypt was glad when they departed, for the fear of them had fallen upon them. He spread a cloud for a covering, and fire to give light in the night. The people asked, he brought quail, and satisfied them with bread of heaven. He opened the rock, and water gushed out. It ran into dry places like a river, for he remembered his holy promise, and Abraham his servant. He brought out his people with joy, his chosen ones with gladness. He gave them the lands of the Gentiles, and they inherited the law of the nations, that they might observe his statutes and keep his laws. Praise the Lord. Again, all of this happened because of that promise to Abraham. And so this is, we see all the good things in which he did above and beyond really what's expected for him or for his people to go to the land of Canaan. And then we also see in Deuteronomy 6:3, we see Moses here talking about this promise that the God says, the God of your fathers has promised you this land, a land flowing with milk and honey, right? So they're going to receive great things, good things. And remember what we looked at several slides ago in Romans 9, that they had this land, they've had this good land, but also the law, the covenants, these promises, it's all been given to them. So they got it all. And they've had what no other nation had. In Deuteronomy 26 and verses 18 through 19, it says, also today the Lord has proclaimed you to be a special people, just as he promised you that you should keep all his commandments, and that he will set you high above all nations, which he has made in praise and name and in honor, and that you may be a holy people to the Lord your God, just as he has spoken. So again, a nation that is set above all other nations. No other nation held a candle to Israel. They were his own special people. And again, we see that emphasized in Paul in his writing in Romans and in other passages as well. We see in Luke 1, verses 67 through 75. So this is Zacharias, which has been the father of John the Baptist. And we won't read this, but notice that if we were reading this, that he's talking about connecting John the Baptist, him, the Christ coming, and that this was all a part of God remembering the promises that He'd given to the fathers, remembering that holy covenant there. It says, the oath which He swore to our father Abraham to grant us that we, being delivered from the hand of our enemies, might serve Him without fear in holiness and righteousness before Him all the days of our life. And so, again, it's pretty clear that God blessed Israel tremendously. We have this land promise. We see that there were special people. We also see that through them, Christ was going to come. But how did Israel react to these blessings? And I'm talking about Israel as a whole. What did they just show complete gratitude to God and always obeyed Him and did whatever he asked them to do? Well, if you're familiar with the Bible, you know that that's simply not the case. That Israel, reading about the history of Israel, is reading about their rebellion towards God. It's just over and over and over again that the nation as a whole did not serve God. And it really wasn't until after the Babylonian captivity and they were brought back that they finally gave up the practice of idolatry or constantly moving towards worshiping idols. Numbers 14, verses 20 through 25 talks about them rejecting really that they see giants in the land of Canaan, that they don't want anything to do with it. We see here that God say that they tested Him 10 times and not heeded His voice as well. And so even after seeing God, we see God in the cloud, we see all these things which He's done. They're still rebelling against God continuously. Their Numbers in 1 Samuel in chapter 8, in verse 7, we see a situation where ultimately the people are not happy with the priest and that they want a king. And it says, and the Lord said to Samuel, heed the voice of the people and all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. So ultimately, them wanting a king was rejecting a rejection of God, and God alone ruling over them, and rather they want some man, something else. And He said that they rejected Him. 1 Kings 9, in verses 6 through 7 says, but if you or your sons at all turn from following me, you do not keep my commandments and statutes, which I've set before you, but go and serve other gods and worship them, then I will cut off Israel from the land which I've given them, and this house which I've consecrated for my name, I will cast out my sight. Israel will be a proverb and a byword among all peoples. So He's warning the people that if you forsake me, and this is, of course, in regards to, I believe at this time it would be the temple, but He says this house that I've consecrated, I'm going to cast it out of my sight. I'm going to be done with y'all if you don't obey me. And eventually that is exactly what happens. We see in 1 Kings 11, of course, this is a big passage in verses 30 through 39, that 10 tribes of Israel break away from Solomon's son Rehoboam, simply because because they would not heed what the 10 tribes wanted. And so we see that those 10 tribes are broken up. Jeroboam it rules over them. But what's also interesting about Jeroboam is God gives Jeroboam the same conditions as He did Solomon. He told Jeroboam that if you serve me, things are going to go well for you. But if not, they're not going to work out for you. And which I always find fascinating here, that God gave everybody the same chance. Even these people like Jeroboam, who normally, you think about Jeroboam and you think about him, he's almost a bad word in the Bible. That when the Bible references Jeroboam, they're talking about the evil that he did. But before all that started, we see that God gave Jeroboam a choice, and he chose wrongly. And then we see Jeremiah 32, verses 26 through 35, again, some things in which the people of Israel are doing. It says it says at the very end here, it says, they built the high places of Baal, which are in the valley of the son of Hinnom, to cause their sons and daughters to pass through the fire to Molech, which I did not command them, nor did it come into my mind that they should do this abomination to cause Judah to sin. So it says that they're causing their sons and daughters to pass through the fire to Moloch, and I'm not sure exactly what's all going on here, but this is the worst of the worst idolatry, and it's so bad. God makes it clear that this was not part of the plan. That he did not even fathom that they would get this bad. He says it did not come into my mind that they should do this abomination. Okay, so God did not foresee any of this happening. And you kind of see that, you read this, you kind of picture the shock here that, how could you do such a thing here? But they're doing something so horrible that God wanted nothing to do with it, and definitely didn't have any plans for them to do that. And so we see generally, and not all Israel was bad. We do see a lot of individuals that were faithful towards God, but generally, when we read the story of Israel, it is a story of unbelief. It's a story of rebellion. So Israel was blessed. They received all of these great things, but yet they did not keep them. Okay. So when you think about that, and of course, nobody except Jesus has been able to keep that old law. And so, which begs the question, why does God give Israel something that they won't keep? Why did God have this law if they wouldn't keep it? And so we're going to look at some things which the Bible says that will, I think, give us some answers for that. And in Romans 10 and verses 1 through 4, it says, "Brethren, my heart's desire and prayer to God for Israel is that they may be saved. For I bear them witness that they have a zeal for God, but not according to knowledge. For they, being ignorant of God's righteousness and seeking to establish their own righteousness, have not submitted to the righteousness of God. For Christ is the end of law for righteousness to everyone who believes." So the problem here with Israel is not a problem of zeal, but it's misguided zeal. And it says that they have not submitted to the righteousness of God. They're seeking to establish their own righteousness here. And so that is ultimately the problem, is that they won't submit to Christ, basically. And so Galatians 3 verses 23 through 25 gives us some indication about what the purpose of the law was for. It says, "But before faith came, we were kept under guard by the law, kept for the faith which would afterward be revealed. Therefore the law was our tutor to bring us to Christ, that we might be justified by faith. But after faith has come, we are no longer under a tutor." So Paul here is saying that we're kept under guard by the law. The law was a tutor to bring us to Christ. So how was the law a tutor? Well, simply put, is that through the law we know what sin is. I believe that's spoken of in Romans as well, that we would not know what sin is unless we know of these commands. Thou shalt not do this, that, or the other. And through that, we know what sin is. We know that there are consequences for that sin, and there needs to be some way to atone for that. And so that is how the law tutors us to Christ, that there's something missing here in the law, and that we need something different, something more. And so this is how it brings us to Christ, and that we are ultimately justified by faith. Now, when Christ has come, when faith has come, we're no longer under a tutor, which is very important. And I might be diverting here a little bit of the topic here, is that now that Christ has come, now that faith has come, we're no longer under that tutor. We're no longer under the old law. And so we're no longer bound in any way to that law. And so a lot of people will still say that there's still parts of the law that we have to keep. Well, granted, there are parts of the law that are re-emphasized in the new covenant, like you shouldn't murder or lie or steal or whatever it may be, but not everything. Okay. And so if it's not, if it's not, not something that is said that we should be doing or keeping in the new covenant, well, then we're not bound to keep it. That old law is no longer into effect, so we're no longer under that tutor. Romans 11, verses 11 through 15, gives us another reason why this law was in place, and that would, at least in some ways, help, I guess, incentivize Israel to turn to Christ. It says, I say then, had they stumbled, that they should fall? Certainly not, but through their fall, this is talking about the Jews here, the Jews' fall, it says, to provoke them to jealousy, salvation has come to the Gentiles. Now, if their fall is riches for the world, and their failure riches for the Gentiles, how much more their fullness? For I speak to you Gentiles, inasmuch as I am an apostle to the Gentiles, I magnify my ministry, if by any means I may provoke to jealousy those who are my flesh, and save some of them. For if their being castaways the reconciling of the world, what would their acceptance be but from life from the dead? So we're talking, Paul's talking about that the Jews, they're, as a whole, they're not accepting of Christ, and so they're cast away. And so it talks about here their fall, and so through that, we see where the salvation has come to the Gentiles. So that means everybody else. Is not just for the Jews. And Paul says this helps to provoke them to jealousy. That it may, by looking at this and seeing the blessings of God that's now given to the Gentiles, it may cause them in some way to reconsider. And I just think it's interesting here, this motivation of provoking them to jealousy, that seeing that they may finally recognize that salvation is through Christ. But we see where the law, the nation of, or being a Jew physically, now means absolutely nothing here. That they fail, they're cast away, and the only way that they can be reconciled is just like anybody else. They can only be reconciled through Christ here. And so what we see is that the law shows the need for salvation from sin. It tutors us to Christ, so that we need to atone for these sins in some way, and the only way that we can is through Christ. And it's also, provocation for the Jews for the Jews to straighten up. That seeing their fall, seeing their being cast away, and seeing how God has blessed the Gentiles simply through the Gentiles' faith, that it may cause them to reconsider their actions. So I hope this has been useful for all of you. Again, I think it's interesting looking at the law and how it was used, and the implications for the nation of Israel, for the Gentiles, and even for us today. Again, we see that it had a purpose, but now we're no longer under that old law in any shape, form, or fashion, and so we're now under the new law of Christ. And so, if you got any questions or comments, feel free to leave those here. We'll respond to them. And then also, if you have a question or comment when you see it on YouTube, feel free to leave them there. I'll try to respond to them. But until next time, I hope that you all have a good day and a good rest of the week. Thanks.